Countdown to Zero is a documentary, and yet it plays out like a drama. Countdown to Zero is a documentary that says this. You remember we all used to be terrified of nuclear weapons. Remember, Michael Furt and all that stuff. We were all in CND, Nuclear 9
Those
Danker.
were the days.
Those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end, but they did. We all went, nuclear power. Exactly. Who cares? Well, apparently...
I guess she was good.
No, not Mary Hopkin, nuclear power.
Oh,
are you still worried about... I mean, remember...
It's on Apple Records.
When I was growing up...
The B-side was Turn,
Can I do
Turn.
this?
Sorry.
Because we got short time, okay? When I was growing up, do you remember when The Wind Blows came out?
Yes.
The Roman Briggs thing. And then David Bowie did the song for it. It was a big thing. And we all... Did you used to wear, the peace... The peace... The NATO symbol. Did you used to wear...
The NATO
Not
symbol?
NATO.
Do you mean CND?
CND. I say NATO because a very good friend of mine used to, in order to annoy everybody, used to walk around with a badge which said "Peace through NATO." The CND thing. Were you one of those?
I'm.
Do you have a duffel coat?
No, I might have had a duffel coat, but I was always very neutral in these matters.
Okay, well then other things moved on. Cold War ended. Blah 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 blah. We all stopped worrying about nuclear power. Now here comes a documentary that says this. What happened to all the nuclear warheads after the nuclear arms race sort of died away? Where did they go? Where did the stuff go to? Is it possible to make one? Is it possible that they may now be in the hands of terrorists and rogue states? More importantly, are we still in a situation in which that whole thing that Dr. Strangelove says, which is that everything's on a hair trigger, you know what? At any minute it could all go off. We all seem to have forgotten it. But are we still?
Well, are we?
Here's a clip.
The first warning would come from satellites, and they could detect the flame from the booster rocket within seconds, easily within a minute. Suddenly, this early warning hub in the United States would become very frenzied to try to figure out whether this is a false alarm or whether this is a real attack, and determine this within 60 seconds. The president would receive a briefing from the duty officer at Strategic Command Headquarters. That briefing of the president, of his response options and their consequences, has to be delivered in as little as 30 seconds.
Now, what happens during the course of the documentary is that all those things that that I thought, were somehow consigned to the dustbin of history, are all raised up again with the sense that, you know what, actually, these systems are still in place. There are most terrifying, quite apart from the talk about how possible or easy it would be to make a nuclear weapon, and it seems from the documentary that it's easier than you think it is, than one would think it is. All these hair trigger systems are in place, and mistakes have been made, significant mistakes, in the recent past as opposed to the long distant past. By recent past, we're talking about the 90s. There's one incident they refer to in the 90s in which America sent up a satellite. They had told the Russians they were going to do it. Somehow the communication didn't get across, and momentarily the Russians thought that it was a strike and ran into Boris's office and said, "You have to respond now." And he went, "Well, no." But apparently protocol said that actually what he should have done is launched a retaliatory strike, and there's some discussion in the program about whether or not he did or didn't because he was sober or not. But there are incidences of atomic heads falling out of the sky because planes go up with them in and nobody knew about them. There is incidences of nuclear submarines sinking and the atomic weapons never being recovered. And I thought the most impressive thing about the documentary, I mean, the funny thing about it is it's been around for a little while, and it is now slightly out of date. So, for example, it doesn't take into account, the recent death of Osama bin Laden. It doesn't take into account changing situations in Iran. I mean, history is moving on very fast, but it has an amazing selection of people: Jimmy Carter, Tony Blair, Gorbachev. It has a very good selection of talking heads, and what they all seem to say is, you know what? There is still a massive amount of nuclear weaponry out there, and it may well fall into the wrong hands, and you ought to be more worried about it than you are. And I can't remember the last time I went into that sort of documentary and came out feeling more uneasy than I was when I went in, because usually my view of the world is so pessimistic and jaded that I'm usually on the other side of it. And it was interesting. Plus, it does make a point of attempting not to just be one of those old throwback, docs. It's like it's saying you still ought to be afraid, be very afraid. Plus, it's very cinematic.